Labor Committee is called to order. Welcome everyone to this special meeting that we're having this evening. First on our agenda we have Senate File 999 and Senator Boldon is here to present that bill. Senator, I believe that you have an A1 author's amendment, is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Members, would someone move the A1 author's amendment? Thank you. Senator Kubek moves the A1 author's amendment. All in favor of adopting the A1, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The A1 is adopted. Senator Boldon, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members. I'm honored to be able to present this bill to you this evening. Senate File 999 at its core is really a bill about dignity and humanity. This is a bill that would require new public spaces to include adult changing facilities as part of that construction, which some of you maybe have never thought about before and have never needed to think about before. However, it is a critically important issue for many, many folks across our state. The reality for many folks across the state, oftentimes folks with disabilities, is that when they are in public and need to be changed, need to be clean and do what they need to do, there are not spaces for them in bathrooms. So what that means is that they are laying on a bathroom floor or on a sink or somewhere else that is not conducive to humanity and dignity and being clean. So this bill would change that. And what that also means for many Minnesotans, it means that they are not going to where they need to go or want to go and not being able to live their full lives. And so we can fix that, we can remedy that, and that's what this bill is aiming to do. So I will be brief because the more important thing for you to hear is from our testifiers who have this lived experience and can speak to what that really means for people, for Minnesotans across our state. And I'll just note that the amendment that we adopted adds rulemaking around this in conversations with the Minnesota Department of Labor. It makes the bill more workable and a more working process to get to this point.
Thank you, Senator. We have a list of people who have signed up to testify. Do you want me to just go through my list then? Is that who you'd prefer?
That's fine, Madam
to
Chair.
proceed?
Thank you.
Okay, great. First up, we have Sarah St. Louis. Welcome to the Senate Labor Committee. As you sit at the table, if you would introduce yourself to us for the record, and also if you would please make sure that your mouth is pretty close to the microphone, so that way we can hear you really well.
I'm loud without a microphone too,
Very
so
good.
Don't worry.
Very good. Welcome. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Sarah St. Louis. I'm from Shorewood, Minnesota, in Senate District 45. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Labor Committee members, for hearing my testimony in support of SF 999, adult-sized changing tables. I have been in the architecture and construction industry my entire life, and professionally for almost 25 years. I volunteer for numerous nonprofits, including Family Voices of Minnesota. I am a Partners in Policymaking graduate, a disability rights advocate, and most importantly, a mother of 2 children with disabilities. One has depression and anxiety, and the other acquired a traumatic brain injury in 2013 when he was 1 day shy of being 20 months old, when his ex-daycare provider illegally transported him after she put him in a used car seat that was not installed correctly and wrapped her vehicle around the pole on the side my child was on. He lost every ability he had gained in his first 20 months of life. He also subsequently acquired a seizure disorder, cognitive delays, ataxia, and several physical disabilities as a result. I am also the original author of this bill. I wrote it and brought it to legislators during the 2019-2020 session. It started in committee hearings, but unfortunately COVID shut down all non-essential bills that year. But thankfully this year, it has been revived, and I am here to advocate like a mother to make sure it gets signed into law. In the U.S., there are approximately 80 million individuals with a disability, 20 million children, and 60 million plus adults. 67% of people are uncomfortable interacting with a person with a disability. That number rises the more evident and complex a disability is. Ableism is a discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities on the belief that neurotypical, non-disabled people are superior. At its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. Ableism is one of the most socially entrenched and accepted isms and is one of the biggest enablers of other isms. Judgment based on abilities is so ingrained in society that it's used for exclusionary purposes and is hardly ever questioned or realized, and ableism is why we as a society have forced people with disabilities to be changed on dirty public bathroom floors or completely excluded from participating community, and most people don't even consider that not all individuals use a toilet. We have decided that they are not worth dignity, respect, and healthy, safe, and sanitary spaces to use, and made this decision without their input or guidance on what their needs actually are. Building codes, particularly accessibility code, is written with little to no input from the disability community, and final decisions are always decided by non-disabled people that have no daily connection to the disability community and are written to accommodate an average height white male that has full range of motion of their upper body and capable of using a toilet. This does not reflect the disability community, and just one more very evident use of ableism that is not even questioned or examined. Some that may oppose this bill are in my own professional field of architecture and construction. They claim it is too expensive, they don't see the need, that it's too much work, or we've never done it before. Well, I hate excuses, especially ableist excuses. I am a project manager and I expect results, not excuses, especially when they are rooted in the fact that those people pushing those excuses belong to that 67% and have never taken any time to have a conversation with a person with a disability to find out how they experience the world and work with them to make it better. But instead, they continue to create the ableist environments they always have. They would rather blame people with disabilities for their failure to do their job right the first time and instead just make excuses. This is not the disability community's fault. They are not the ones to blame. They do not value those with disabilities and find more ways to exclude them than honor the SCOTUS decision of 1999, commonly referred to as the Olmsted decision, that stated that people with disabilities have the right to live, work, learn, and participate in their communities with the proper community supports and resources. An adult-sized changing table is a proper community resource, and in 2023, there's no excuse for this not already being a part of our code and just what we do, because people with disabilities are significantly valuable to our society, and when they are in the room where decisions are being made that directly impact their lives, they make the world better for everyone. You could leave this room today and fall down the stairs, slip on the sidewalks that are never properly cleared, get in a car accident or have a stroke, and instantly become part of the largest minority group in our country. And tomorrow you could experience your half-naked body being put on a dirty public restroom floor to be changed because you never thought that having a sanitary, safe, adult-sized changing table was worth it or needed. You will learn very quickly how your ableism got in the way of your new needs. Like the recently passed Judy Heumann, may she rest in power, said, "I am willing to make a fuss about it." And I will loudly and proudly make a fuss about this issue and fiercely advocate like a mother so that no one will ever have to be changed on a dirty bathroom floor in the back of a vehicle or forced to be excluded from community because of ableism. I am a leader in inclusiveness and community of love, equity, and justice, and I demand that you start seeing people with disabilities as living, breathing human beings that are deserving of dignity, respect, love, health, safety, and sanitary environments, just as you would expect for yourselves. People with disabilities are human beings, and it is not their responsibility to end ableist mindsets and beliefs that lead them to be harmed, excluded, and discriminated against. It is yours. Start ending ableism in this great state of Minnesota by approving this bill and moving it to Governor Walz's desk so that we can finally bring some form of dignity and respect to our disability community. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Trum Wen. Welcome to the Senate Labor Committee. If you would please introduce yourself for the record, and we look forward to hearing your testimony.
Sure. My name is Trum Wen. Thank you, Chairman and committee members, for hearing the testimony of this bill, SF 999, to require adult size / universal size changing tables to be added to public restrooms. This is an important bill that will fill the gap that is currently not meeting the needs of thousands of citizens that must wear protective, disposable undergarments. My name is Trum Wen. I'm 49 and a mom and a full-time caregiver to my daughter, Sadie. Sadie is 7.5 years old. She's 61 pounds and over 4 feet tall. She was diagnosed with an abnormal chromosomal anomaly, which means she's a medically complex, fragile child. She's wheelchair dependent and will always have to be diapered for the rest of her life. There is legislation for baby changing tables, and even for airports to have service animal relief areas. But we do not have legislation to support humans larger than 40 pounds that can't fit on a baby changing table anymore. Universal changing tables would work for a baby up to a person with adult size. To give an example where there are no changing tables, adult size changing tables, government buildings, so when she has to get a state ID or a passport, Minnesota visitor centers and rest stop areas, parks, recreational facilities, public libraries and schools, where most of them function as voting venues, large sporting concert venues. So the new Allianz Field, the Twin Stadium, the Viking Stadiums, all did not come with adult-sized changing tables. And surprisingly, hospitals and medical clinics. So surprisingly, the Mayo Clinic does not have adult-sized changing tables. We are a medical tourism state, but yet our legislation doesn't show it. Places that I've had to change my daughter: floors of the bathroom. Many of us don't even want to touch the handles to flush the toilet. Back of the trunk of my van, and on a grassy knoll in the park. In addition to the needs of my daughter, we have a growing aging population that necessitates further investments in universal size changing tables. My father was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune at age 65. His end-of-life care also necessitated the use of adult diapers. He didn't want to go out in public spaces, and so he sat at home because he didn't want to sit in a soiled diaper, and so the caregivers also had to stay in. As senators, you represent citizens with small businesses and large companies. So you're wondering, what does this cost them? Some tables can cost as low as $3,000 for a stationary table and vary up to $10,000 for a wall-mounted. My family owned a small restaurant, and my mom had said if the cost was as low as $3,000, she didn't see it as an obstacle to build her restaurant if it was for a new building. For retrofitting, there are actually tax credits for small businesses under the Disabled Access Credit that can range up to $15,000. I and other people like me with family members and loved ones would support more of these businesses if they had the adult-sized changing table. COVID highlighted for everyone in this room what isolation was like. We as humans need to get out into the community. This is a major obstacle for not only the people that are diapered, but their caregivers, and we're stuck in isolation. So where do we rank? 4 other states have passed the state law: Arizona, California, New Hampshire, and Tennessee. Several other states, like Minnesota, do have bills in front of them. Mississippi has the bill, and it is out of the Senate. Bill SF 999 will give guidance for new building projects and large-scale renovation projects for public spaces to ensure that a universal-sized changing table be available for all people who need to be diapered in a safe, private, and hygienic capacity. Please remove one of the biggest obstacles for this community and their caregivers. Thank you for your time, and I can answer any questions you have. I do have copies of various changing tables and their costs if you would like to see that, so I can give that to Senator Boldon here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Kelly Cosell. Welcome. Please state your name for the record. We look forward to hearing your testimony.
Madam Chair and committee members, my name is Kelly Castle. I am a mother of a 14-year-old son with autism. I am a multi-generational caregiver. So I have been caregiving for my cousin who has cancer, for my mother-in-law who has numerous medical complexities, and I have been a caregiver in the past for people who have died, for family members. I'm going to talk about this past summer. My cousin Jill was diagnosed 4 years ago with breast cancer, but in December of 2022, she was diagnosed with bone cancer. She broke her femur just standing with her walker. And so the last 6 months of her life, she sometimes could walk with a walker. She sometimes had to be in a wheelchair. Sometimes she could ride with me in my minivan because I could put the wheelchair in the back. Sometimes she needed medical transportation to get her to her appointments. Sometimes when medical transportation wouldn't show up, I still would have to somehow carry her and get her into my van. This past June, she wanted to go to a graduation party, and unfortunately, I was away for a week with my family. So her boyfriend took her to the graduation party. Unfortunately, he is not a caregiver, and there was basically nowhere to change her. So she sat in a wet diaper all day. This was all day Saturday. She wanted to spend the last time with her extended family. On Sunday night, she called me to say, "Are you coming tomorrow to the TCU where she was?" And I said yes. She went to get ready for bed. She got up on her walker and she fell. She ended up having a UTI infection. 24 hours later, she had a stroke, and 24 hours later, she died. What I will say is my cousin was young at heart. She, having cancer and having all these medical complexities, she wanted to spend the last years of her life out in the community, going to graduation parties, going to the Minnesota Zoo, going to the state fair. But the Minnesota Zoo and the state fair, they don't have family bathrooms with adult changing stations. All I'm saying is, as we move forward with bonding, as new parks are being built, as things need construction, let's do it the right way. I advocated for the city of Eagan, Woodhaven Park. It's an inclusive park. I advocated at that park to have a bathroom with an adult changing station. There is 4 bathrooms. 2 of them have adult changing stations. What I will tell you is that all my friends, generations, older and younger, we go to that park. And we go to that park because of the adult changing stations. We go to local restaurants. We go to local gas stations around that park. When you do dignity and you do things right, people will come. And there's many older generations that will lose their physical dignity. So they might be able to walk with a walker, they might have to use a wheelchair, and they might be too weak to get out of a wheelchair. I don't want to have to make a decision to either change somebody on a floor or the grass at the Minnesota Zoo because we don't have the dignity to get or make a family bathroom with adult changing stations. I just wanted to share my personal story because I have been advocating for this for 10 years. I am also a Partners in Policymaking graduate class 35. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Kossel. Next on our list, we have Linda Hood. Welcome to the Senate Labor Committee.
Thank you. Hi, I am happy to be here. My name is Linda Hood, and I am in support of the bill 0999 for increasing or having accessible adult changing stations and bathrooms. I know that some of you have seen my testimony on television, and you know that I have been advocating for this because I personally have been changed on the floor. So I have gone to management at U.S. Stadium and have advocated for this to have an adult changing station. And of course, on MST Airport, and they have 4 bathrooms at those terminals, and they'll museum. And I just want to say that I'm laying this picture out because economically it makes sense. Passing this bill will be profitable for businesses. And you can tell the business owners that they can contact places like U.S. Stadium because their ticket sales are going to increase because they know that's out there in the public that there is an adult changing station. So if Grandpa wants to go to the Vikings game, now son can go and grandson can go and the whole family can enjoy it. But if one person can't go, oftentimes the whole family declines. So it's very profitable. So the other thing is that it's going to be used. So it's not something that's just going to be available for 1 or 2 people. The parks are out there. People will come to the park because they want to go to birthday parties and enjoy the outdoors. As far as the largest stadiums, they would love to enjoy a Twins game. They wouldn't enjoy going back to college and taking and getting a degree and not have to sit there and walk back and forth because you have to go to the bathroom or you need to be changed. And I'm telling you, it can be very embarrassing, not just, and I'm being honest with you, not just liquid waste, but solid waste. And you have no control over that, and it's humiliating. So I like to appeal to the economic part of this deal and talk about the cost and the profit, because it will profit it because it's marketable. And so if you happen to have this available, then people are willing to pay extra money, and such as myself, to visit MST Airport and connect there in opposed to spending less money connecting in an airport that does not have the facilities. So it's going to be beneficial. Also, I want to talk about the future. As we look, the age is increasing for people. We're living longer, and there's more elderly people. We have to look at accommodating those things. I'll be long gone, but what about the rest of the generation? So we have to take a look at long term. The Olympics will be in Los Angeles in 2028. That's not a long time. People will come from all over the world The United States limited to the example. Minnesota can be an example for the world. They will come and see that, look, this is a place that we can go and visit, and that we can enjoy not just Terror Olympics, but the spectators to see the Terror Olympics and the Olympics, because they're adequate bathrooms. I hope you understand, and I hope that you will support this bill, and that I guarantee it'll be a money maker, money back on their investment. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. That concludes the list of testifiers who we had sign up ahead of time. Senator Boldon, I would go ahead now and move to discussion amongst the committee. Would you like any final word before we have our discussion?
No, Madam Chair.
All right. Members, discussion, questions for Senator Boldon? Yes, Senator Grunhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you, Senator Boldon, for bringing this bill forward. I think we need to discuss it. You know, one of the testimonies that was said that kind of struck me is some facilities have a place for animals, but not disabled people. Is that true? Okay. Yeah, something's wrong, in my opinion. But anyway, the other thing, somebody mentioned a federal tax credit that's available for a business if they install these. Is that correct, or did I hear that? Did I hear that correctly?
I believe, thank you, Madam Chair, thank you, Senator Boldon. I did believe that you heard that correctly. I would, if you want to know details about that, I would defer to our expert testifiers, but.
Oh.
Hi.
Trum Wen?
Trum Wen. Yep, so in 2015, the Babies Act put the babies changing tables in. 2016, there is the law for service animal relief in airports. So they are being installed. So if you go, you'll see them in Terminal 1 and Terminal 2, there are service animal reliefs. But there are no, so Minneapolis Airport has it in for Terminal 1, but Terminal 2 is not set for 2030, I think is when they'll put those the adult-sized changing tables in. So in the studies, yes, there is, for small, of course, I am not an accountant, there are tax reliefs, but there was a tax credit for small businesses that under $1 million or less than 30 employees, they could get a tax credit. There was 2 ways that they could get this tax credit that could equal up to $15,000. There are grants. The AARP did grants where you could even do installation of adult changing tables, and the grants could go up to $15,000. Tennessee has even funded grants for their Department of up to $100,000, and businesses could even then apply for these grants to put in changing tables up to $5,000 to help support the causes. So there is grant money out there. There are tax credits out there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Grunhagen, follow up.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for that information. Do we have anything in the state tax credit or anything that anybody's aware of?
No.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Maybe we should have that. Okay, the other question I have, you know, you go, a lot of facilities, this applies to newer or remodeled, correct? Substantially remodeled?
Senator Boldon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. New construction moving forward, yes.
Okay. And then, like, you go into a lot of restrooms, they have a disabled stall, okay? So would the changing table be installed in there, or is it a separate, they'd have to have something separate besides?
Senator Boldon or one of your testifiers care to address
Sarah
that?
St. Louis, so I'm your architectural person. Currently, the adult or accessible stalls are only made for a 60-inch diameter circumference. In the upcoming 2024 accessibility code, which I hope you all adopt as soon as it drops, makes these stalls bigger. That would allow potentially for something to do that. Preferably, having family restrooms because, would be more ideal to put these into because, it also is for people with children of opposite sex or your parents or having to care for your spouse. So anybody can use those restrooms. So that would be the preferred. It is potential, if we design the code correctly, that they could in the larger stall sizes, because those have to have like a 72-inch turning radius.
Thank you. Senator Grunhagen, any follow-up?
No, thanks for that information. That just helps clarify a few things in my mind.
Very good. Yes, Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Senator Boldon, I first want to say thank you for bringing this forward. I want to thank all the testifiers for coming and bringing light to a situation that honestly I had not heard much about. I've experienced it, but not to the extreme that we've gotten to hear today, and so I really appreciate that. And I was looking over your bill. If you need some bipartisan support, maybe I'll be willing to hop on there with you. Basically, the only question I have is what's the path of the bill? Is this going to the floor after today, or what's the plan here?
Senator Liskey, great question. We, with the way that the amendment occurred on the bill today, we're now needing to send it to state gov because of the rulemaking portion. And then I believe after that, it would go to finance, is my understanding. But if you know something, anything different, of course, Senator, speak up.
I think that's right, Madam Chair.
Okay. Like I said, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the bill. I work with a lot of disabled individuals, and honestly, yes, it's kind of sad that we don't have anywhere other than bathroom floors to change anyone over the weight of 40 pounds. I even know some children who they are not disabled, they're just children. They happen to be just big. My nephew was a big child, and he passed that before he was 2. So it does happen, and unfortunately, this is something that we definitely have to worry about. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Very good. All right. It looks like our discussion is concluded. Do you have any last word, Senator Boldon?
Just a word of thank you, Madam Chair, especially to our testifiers for bringing their story and lived experience, and committee members for listening. Senator Liskey would be happy to have you sign on to the bill. As I started with, this really is a matter of dignity and humanity, and something we can do about that. So I hope we do. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing the bill, Senator Boldon. Members, would someone like to move that Senate File 999 as amended be recommended to pass and be referred to the State Government Committee? Senator Liskey makes that motion.
I will make that motion.
Thank you, Senator Liskey. All in favor of Senator Liskey's motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Thank you, testifiers.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda today, we have Senate File 2440. Here, let's see. Oh, there she is. And Senator Mohamed is here to present Senate File 2440. Welcome, Senator, to the Senate Labor Committee.
Thank you, Chair McEwen and members of the committee. This is Senate File 2440, which comes from the Department of Labor and Industry. It's a technical change. It makes a technical change to construction codes and licensing provisions. The technical change improves customer protections for home buyers and the like. And I have somebody from the Department of Labor with me, Director Scott.
Very good. Welcome to the Senate Labor Committee.
Thank you.
If you'd please introduce yourself and your title for the record, we look forward to your testimony.
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Scott McClellan. I'm the Director of the Construction Codes and Licensing Division and the State Building Official. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify on Senate File 2440. I will briefly go through each of the 7 sections in the bill, if I may. Section 1 of the bill speeds up the timeline for retaking a license exam. This will allow applicants who failed their exam to retake it 30 days after the date of their failed examination, rather than having to wait 30 days after they receive an email notification from our office, which can sometimes be later. So this change will make it more expedient for individuals to retake their license exam. Section 2 of the bill amends the definition of a technology systems contractor by adding licensed master electrician as a second type of license holder who may serve as the responsible licensed individual. Currently, only a power-limited technician can serve in this capacity. This change gives more options to technology system contractors to be able to select from a licensed master electrician for their responsible licensed individual. Section 3 of the bill updates language defining the composition of the Board of Electricity so that the board is more balanced between employer and employee representatives, similar to the other boards. This moves one of the two power-limited technician contractor seats to a new power-limited technician. So we would have one employer position in the power-limited as the contractor and one the employee as the power-limited technician. And this is consistent with the way our other boards are set up. Section 4 of the bill clarifies an exemption to the residential building contractor license to make it clear that anyone who improves real estate with the intent of reselling does not qualify for the license exemption and would have to be licensed. This is commonly known as the house flipper rule. So this bill would clarify that and strengthen that. Section 5 of the bill updates language providing for license reciprocity with other states, specifically for high-pressure pipe fitting licensees. The new language would permit the Board of High-Pressure Piping to actually approve license reciprocity agreements consistent with the other existing language governing reciprocity agreements we have for the other two boards. So that would be for high-pressure piping specifically, and then they would all be the same. Section 6 of the bill updates language defining the composition of the Board of High-Pressure Piping. In order to facilitate an increase in qualified applicants, this update removes an unnecessary employment requirement for the two members who are currently journey worker high-pressure pipe fitters and makes the provision consistent with the other boards of plumbing and electrical. So this will provide greater flexibility for eligibility on the boards without compromising expertise. And lastly, a fairly technical piece, but Section 7 of the bill updates the parameters for exempting boilers from inspection. A new interpretation of this statute has led to devices being exempt from inspection that should not be and results in a public safety risk. This bill updates the statute to clearly differentiate the two types of devices, hot water supply boilers and commercial industrial water heaters, and places the inspection exemption levels for each in line with the nationally recognized standards and with other states. So as these devices are used in public buildings, we want to make sure that this update happens to ensure that these devices are inspected. So as I read this out loud, I realize it's fairly technical in certain aspects, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you for your testimony. We do not have any other people signed up to testify on this technical bill. So members, I'm going to go ahead and move it to discussion. Any questions or discussion? Yes, Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to thank Licensing Director McCullum for your work and the good work you do. So I appreciate all the work you do. I just have one question on reciprocity. You said for high-pressured pipe. Is there any other trades that you work with that other states? Is it just strictly this one? I know in the bill it is just strictly this one, but is there other opportunities that you've worked with other states on other trades?
Certainly.
Director McClellan.
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative Dornick, yes, in fact, the boards of electricity and plumbing do have reciprocity agreements, and we actually have a very active one with the Board of Electricity. And they actually attend meetings at least annually with other states discussing reciprocity issues. So we do have with electrical and plumbing specifically. And this, with the high-pressure piping, would bring them in line with those two boards.
Follow-up, Senator Dornick? Okay. Members, any further discussion on Senate File 2440? Okay. Thank you for bringing this bill, Senator Mohamed. Are there any further comments or any statement you'd like to make before we move your bill?
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it, Senator McEwen.
Thank you. And actually, Senate File 2440 is going to be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda, we have Senate File 1561, and Senator Murphy is here to present that bill. Welcome, Senator Murphy, to the Senate Labor Committee.
Madam Chair and members, thank you so much for making time on a Monday evening for this legislation and for us.
And Senator Murphy, is there an amendment that you are offering today, or is that not in the plan?
Madam Chair, I am fortunate to be before this committee with a couple of proposals tonight. And this is the Keeping the Nurses at the Bedside Act. And I believe that there is an amendment that has come from the Department of Labor and Industry. I believe that's the A11 amendment. And if that is, as you understand it, then yes. I would love to, for you to move that.
Okay, thank you, Senator Murphy. And do we have that already in our packets, Senator, the amendment? Thank you. Well, they're passing it out. Okay, thank you. We're having that amendment passed out right now. Thank you very much. And are the, here we're just looking this over quick. Perhaps what we should, it looks to be an amendment from the Department of Labor in cooperation with the Department of Labor and Industry. If you're comfortable, Senator Murphy, we can go ahead and move that amendment, and then do you plan to talk about it with the changes that have occurred?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Do we have a motion for the A11? Thank you. Senator Kubek moves the A11 amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The A11 amendment is adopted. Senator Murphy, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. This is Senate File 1561, what we are commonly calling the Keeping the Nurses at the Bedside Act. This is the second committee hearing of this proposal in the Minnesota Senate after many years of anticipation and a lot of work on the part of the nurses and others to get this proposal into the shape that it is before you today. And I will say that it is legislation that I have worked on since first elected to the legislature back in 2007 when I served in the Minnesota House. As you know, I am a registered nurse. I'm still licensed. I gave COVID vaccines during the pandemic and have been teaching at St. Kate's. So nursing is my chosen profession and a part of who I am and a part of the work that I continue to do. Nursing is first and foremost a caregiving profession, but we have an obligation, both professionally through licensure and through the Code of Nursing, to be advocates for our patients. And this legislation is the best representation of this kind of advocacy. When first introduced so many years ago, the legislation contained a fixed ratio. The legislation said that the hospitals have to have this many patients and this many nurses to take care of them. When we think about hospital caregiving, there is, of course, a ratio already in place. There are so many patients and so many nurses. That math equation is a ratio. This legislation no longer contains a fixed ratio. The nurses have done so much work, and a couple of years ago moved away from that proposal, which was near and dear to the hearts of many of the practicing nurses in our hospitals across the state. But they also understood that they were having a hard time getting that legislation moved through this legislature. And they have instead opted for a proposal that creates committees within every hospital where nurses, staff nurses caring for patients, and the nursing administrators, the managers, come together in committee to make decisions about the staffing that is appropriate given the hospital, because we know our hospitals across the state are different from one another. And they also are addressing things like the nursing pipeline, nursing education, the issue of workplace violence that has really emerged in the last number of years. Although it's always been an issue, it has become much more intense. And then reports on hospital staffing. This is a proposal much different than where we started. It is a cooperative proposal, but the goal is to make sure that we're retaining our skilled nurses at the bedside. We know when our loved ones go to a hospital, they are there for many things, but fundamentally, they are there for skilled nursing care. You don't go to a hospital without getting nursing care, and nurses are the people who see the patients every shift on every unit. They are the ones who have eyes on the patients all of the time. They're the only ones, really, that have their eyes on the patients all of the time. And we know that when there are skilled, highly qualified nurses caring for our patients, that the outcomes for the patients are better. As policymakers, we want to make sure that our loved ones going to hospitals are getting high-quality care. That is a goal that nurses and hospitals share, along with all of us who are in a position to represent the interests of the people of Minnesota and making sure that we're delivering on their commitment. So I am very proud to be with you tonight to present this version of the Keeping the Nurses at the Bedside Act, which has at its heart the goal to retain our skilled nurses. Too many are coming out of school, going into practice, and leaving swiftly the other door because it's not what they expected. That's undermining high-quality care here in the state of Minnesota. We want to change that, and that's what this proposal is about, and I hope to earn your support this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. We have a list of people who have signed up to present testimony, and do you have testifiers who are part of the presentation of the bill? Would you like to go ahead with those testifiers then, Senator Murphy?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would. I have with me Carrie Mortrude, who comes from the Minnesota Nurses Association, who has expertise in this legislation, and then we have a nurse who is here this evening from Cambridge, Minnesota, and when she's ready, she should join us as well.
Very
Carrie,
good.
do you want to begin?
Sure. Okay. Welcome, both of you, to the Senate Labor Committee. If you would please introduce yourselves and any title or affiliation you'd like us to note for the record, and make sure you lean into the microphone so we can hear you really well. And we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify tonight. My name is Carrie Mortrude, and I gave up bedside nursing over 18 years ago for one reason. I couldn't safely care for my patients. Shift after shift, as nurses appeal to nurse leaders for help with seriously unsafe staffing, they are often met with indifference. Many of you have asked the nurses to deal with this at the negotiating table. However, contract cycle after cycle, nurses are met with statements such as, "We will never negotiate over staffing." It's true there was a win on staffing for one hospital system, in that staffing cannot get worse. Not get better, just not get worse. In accordance with the Nurse Practice Act, registered nurses are required to deliver safe and effective care despite not having any decision-making authority to determine just how many nurses are required to provide that safe and effective care. Responsibility without authority. Minnesota Statute 148-261 explains that a negative outcome to a patient doesn't even have to occur for a nurse to be disciplined by the Board of Nursing. Nurses' licenses and jobs can be put on the line for decisions made by hospital administrators. Nurses have been disciplined for advocating for safer patient care. You may hear from the hospitals and the opposition that staffing legislation doesn't work because there's currently a nursing shortage in California, the state with mandated ratios. This is a false narrative. Compared to Minnesota, California's vacancy rate was significantly lower in 2021. California nurses also tended to work full-time due to better working conditions with regard to safe staffing. In 2020, 63% of California nurses worked in full-time positions, in comparison with only 32% of Minnesota nurses doing the same. The old way of doing things isn't working. We are here presenting a solution to the retention issue. The work environment must change in order to keep nurses at the bedside. That change includes true partnership when staffing is unsafe. M&A collects concern for safe staffing data from nurses when in their professional judgment, they believe patients are at risk of being harmed or have been harmed. Our most recent data showed that nearly 90% of the time nurses sounded the alarm that staffing was unsafe and patients were at risk, management did not help resolve the staffing concern and simply did not respond, sometimes at all, to their calls for help. At that same time, adverse healthcare events went up 33% for hospitals last year. That means Minnesotans were more likely to experience having the wrong limb amputated, having surgery performed on the wrong patient, sexual assault, or even death. How many nurses must be disciplined for advocating for their patients before we are heard? How many nurses must leave before we are heard? How many patients must suffer substandard or even seriously unsafe staffing before we are heard? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair McEwen and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the dire issues we have in our hospitals. My name is Kelly Hallow. I've been a registered nurse since 2020, and I have 10 years of healthcare experience prior to nursing. In the spring of 2022, I accepted a new position in the emergency room as a nurse, and I also was elected as a steward with M&A in the emergency room. Due to deep concerns with the staffing and patient care in the ED, I often would fill out M&A's concern for safe staffing reports. In July of 2022, my manager approached me in a public area of the emergency room and confronted me about my unsafe staffing reports. She told me that 2 nurses at night in the emergency room was appropriate staffing and I should not be filling out these reports. At one point when she confronted me, this was publicly, she yelled at me and was interrupted by another nurse who removed me from the situation. Knowing there needed to be a change, I continued to fill out these unsafe staffing reports. This manager continued to bully and harass me. She encouraged staff to complain about me. She fished about negative information about me from other coworkers. She complained to my coworkers about me and held multiple investigatory meetings about me, about complaints from patients and or staff, none of which were substantiated. Numerous nurses have left my emergency room the emergency room where I work due to this bullying and it's often centered around staffing concerns. We are often overrun with boarding patients, sometimes waiting days for beds here in the metro. Those patients do not receive the care that they deserve. We do not have enough staff to handle the constant flow of emergency room patients on top of boarding patients. Nurses who bring these issues to management often face bullying in many different forms. They lose out on opportunities to earn more money with precepting or charge nurse pay, and they also see their schedules change without reason. They're constantly harassed by management. So many nurses have left that a large percentage of our nurses at my facility are traveling nurses, and this has been true since 2021. So we need your intervention and your support. So please pass SF 1561, the Keeping Nurses at Bedside Act.
Thank you for your testimony. I have a couple of other people who have signed up to offer testimony as well. So perhaps we can hear from them, and then Senator Murphy, if you'd like to have experts up with you to take questions, then we can do that as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next, we have Adam Carlin. Welcome to the Senate Labor Committee. If you'd introduce yourself for the record and any affiliations you'd like us to note, we look forward to your testimony.
Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you for hearing my testimony tonight. My name is Adam Carlin. I'm the Clinical Nursing Director of Critical Care at Park Nicollet Methodist Hospital. I have a doctorate and board certification in nursing leadership and have spent the last 8 years as a nursing leader and the prior 6 years as an ICU nurse. We strongly oppose Article 2 of this bill, as it threatens to replace our existing staffing committee with a divisive, one-size-fits-all legislative mandate. At Methodist, we have a longstanding process for collaboration to review our staffing concern forms without retaliation. Our approach empowers team members to speak up in the moment and then work with their leaders and team for real-time resolution. Timely and transparent communication between nurse leaders and our frontline care teams is essential for our team culture and retention. And retaliation is certainly not part of our retention equation. In fact, the code of conduct of my organization, Health Partners, which represents 8 hospitals, states our commitment to non-retaliation. All Minnesota hospitals have an ethical and regulatory obligation to practice and promote just culture, the cornerstone of which is speaking up for safety. The notion of retaliation in this bill is completely out of touch with the professional practice and organizational cultures across Minnesota hospitals. This unwarranted and extreme retaliation section is by no means the worst part of Article 2. Article 2 is collectively bad because access to patient care would be compromised across Minnesota by authorizing a direct path to mandatory staffing ratios. Every Minnesotan needing hospital care will be reduced to a number, and if the math equation of patients and nurses doesn't add up to a number determined by an arbitrator, Minnesotans will be denied access to timely care. If inflexible staffing ratios are enforced, hospitals will be forced to close units and reduce the overall services they can provide to our communities. Thank you.
Next on our list, we have Mary Krinke. Hello. Welcome to the Senate Labor Committee. If you would please introduce yourself and any affiliation you'd like us to note for the record. We look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. Madam Chair, and for the record, my name is Mary Krinke, and I'm with the Minnesota Hospital Association. My testimony tonight will focus on the sections of the bill regarding the Department of Labor and Industry and the newly proposed fines for actions deemed to be in retaliation against nurses. This is found in 2 sections of the bill, Article 2, Section 6, Subdivision 9. This is in regards to submitting a concern for safe staffing form. The hospitals with collective bargaining agreements are receiving these forms now. They're submitted by union members. The forms are usually submitted to the M&A first, and sometimes then the forms get forwarded to the nurse leadership. We do not believe there is any retaliation for submission of these forms. The troubling aspect of this language in the bill, it says that the department must impose a hefty fine of $250,000. It doesn't say may, it does not say up to $250,000. Article 2, Section 9 prohibits retaliation against a nurse for refusing to accept a patient assignment. Once again, we do not believe there is retaliation by hospitals or nurse leadership against a nurse for doing this. Refusal to accept a patient, however, is not done by physicians, no matter how tired they are, no matter how busy the emergency room is. The identified best practice is for nurses to go to their charge nurse, their direct supervisor, and then to the chief nursing officer to identify additional resources that may be needed, which could be either staffing or additional training. Nurse leaders may need to pull nurses from other units, from clinics, or to call additional nurses to come in. This is referred to as the chain of command. Hospitals with collective bargaining agreements usually have an identified process for doing this. We do not support putting this language in statute, which could imply that refusing to accept a patient is encouraged behavior. I want to close by saying that MHA supports several articles of the provisions in this bill. Hospitals want to work collaboratively with all of our care team on reducing workplace violence, supporting loan forgiveness for nurses, and the mental health programs. There's funding in the bill for mental health for our healthcare workforce. Our opposition and concerns are all contained in Article 2, which contains numerous new staffing mandates, including staffing ratios by committees, and there is language in the bill that says if they don't get to an agreement, it will be turned over to legally binding arbitration, which is outside of a hospital. I want to repeat, would have staffing done outside of a hospital with legally binding arbitration. Article 2 will create new problems of access to care when hospital units are closed. We are asking legislators to understand that Article 2 is not a good solution to our current financial and workforce challenges. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, it's my intention now to have our committee members have some discussion and perhaps may have some questions for you, Senator. Is there any words that you'd like to say before we begin our discussion, or as we begin our discussion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really like the way you run your committee. I am anxious and ready to begin the discussion.
Very good. Thank you. Members, any questions for Senator Murphy or her experts or discussion about the bill? Yes, Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Murphy, I've kind of approached you prior to the committee hearing today, and I want to kind of tell you what the purpose of what we were talking about. And I've got the article pulled up here in front of me, so that way we can kind of talk about it now, and then we'll talk about it more later, hopefully, as you promised. The concerns that we heard are from hospitals. I understand that, and I've kind of expressed to you that I've also gotten several calls, several emails from constituents who are nurses and nurse, charge nurse, so on and so forth, lots of ranking different individuals. And being that most of my district is a rural area, the concern there is that the rural hospitals will have to change how they staff, or they may have to shut down wings of their hospitals. Each one of the hospitals has reached out to me saying that is likely what would happen if these committees have to get imposed on them. Being that that's concerning, I also have an article here, and I'll talk to you more about it, but it's from the University of Minnesota, especially from the rural part. So it's their research department on rural areas. And what it basically states is that rural hospitals are already showing signs of issues in their maternity wards, in their emergency departments. They're showing staffing issues. If we impose this on rural hospitals, it's only going to significantly make that more difficult. Their concern is that the nurses themselves won't have time for the committees, the discussion about what's the agreed upon ratio, things of that nature. And so I'd be happy to go over it and sit down and actually read through it with you so that we can have a better, broader discussion offline, but hopefully you're open to that.
Thank you, Senator Liskey. Senator Murphy, if you have any response, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, we can continue our discussion, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to Senator Liskey's comments if you'd like it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Liskey, and I appreciate the conversation that we had before the committee began. My first practice as a nurse was in a rural hospital in the center of Wisconsin. I think our hospitals are under tremendous pressure. I think they're under financial pressure. I think they're under staffing pressure. And we know that hospitals are, as they consolidate and shift, we know that rural communities are experiencing more distance to travel, less services in their communities. And that is a problem that we need to wrestle with. That is in addition to or extra besides this question of staffing. As I have expressed earlier, what we believe this proposal will do is shift the way nurses are experiencing their work in a way that nurses will want to stay in their jobs because they have a little more say and a little more professional control and a little less worry that they're going to be in a situation that is out of their hands, but they are responsible. And we are responsible when we are caring for patients through our license. And if we have a patient assignment that exceeds our ability, we are responsible for those patients. I talked about an early experience of my own in that rural hospital when we had this bill up in Health and Human Services. It was a night shift. It was a big unit. There were 2 registered nurses, and we had critical patients. We had a newly discharged from the intensive care unit patient who had just been extubated, and he was afraid that he couldn't breathe. He needed a lot of emotional support. This was a hospital unit that was shaped like an H, so he was at one end of the H. Halfway down that hallway, For the first time in my life, I took care of somebody who had a cardiac arrest. He coded. And so I started CPR and called the code. And the code team came up. It takes a little while. So I was doing CPR in there on my own for a little while. He did not survive that night. Across the hallway, down at the other end of the H, I was a patient with a real GI bleed. And that is a scary situation. And it took a while for us to get that patient discharged to the operating room so they could take care of that patient and that bleed. We asked for extra hands. We didn't get them. Not until the morning did we get them. That is not uncommon. We know that people get sicker, things that happen, and you want to make sure that you have skilled professionals that you can count on. And that night, the nurse that I was working with, her name was Susan Lloyd, she was excellent, and we backed each other up. The question for us is what happens when somebody comes into the hospital in that moment, and they should be admitted to your unit, and you can't take them. And the only place for that person to go is to your unit. Is that patient, that newly admitted patient, going to get the care that they need? Or should we be able to say, wait, nope, this isn't right for this new person? That's fundamentally what this is about, in making sure that the nurses, along with the people who run that hospital, have the ability to say, that's a situation we don't want, because it could hurt the patients and patient care. Everybody wants our loved ones to go to the hospital when they're sick. And if you go to the hospital, you want to get the care that you need. We all want that. But just ignoring the staffing issues isn't going to do it. And we know that pumping new nurses in through the pipeline isn't solving the problem. 2,400 nurses have left the profession in this last year. We know that nurses come into the profession and they leave within the first 3 to 5 years because it's very hard, physical, unsafe work. But we want the skilled nurses to stay. And I found in my practice in a rural hospital that the nurses that are there, they're there for their career, but we want them to stay and choose that job. So yes, I will happily talk with you because I think this is important for our hospitals across the state, and we've got to get it right for the different kinds of hospitals. We all want that for the people that live in our communities.
Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Senator Murphy, again, I think you hit it right on the head there with that last little bit there is we're worried about the patient, maybe from two different perspectives on how to handle the situation, but we're worried about that person who now comes to the ward, brand new to this floor, wherever, whatever, however you want to describe it, and here we are having to make a decision. Does that person get care? Do they not get care? And do we leave it up to a committee? Do we leave it up to the nurse themselves? Do we leave it up to the doctor? We have to make those decisions. And so I think that's exactly where this discussion, the concern, you're hearing it from both sides. And I think that's what we need to focus on is the patient. So thank you.
Members, yes, Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for your testimony. And I've seen this bill only with a ratio in it, other sessions. I know you've worked on a long time. Thank you for being a nurse. My wife and I have both been in the hospital probably in the last 20 years. And nurses are doing God's work, okay? At least the ones I've had. So I sincerely appreciate them. Just a couple things. There was testimony about this $250,000 fine and that some of the wording could be changed or it could be graduated. Do you have any thoughts on that area? And I appreciate the changes you have made, but that seemed to be a major concern right there. If you have any response to that.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. The amendment that we have already accepted this evening from the Department of Labor and Industry did change a must to may.
I saw that, yeah.
Yep, and I have begun now a pretty robust discussion with DLI to make sure that we have this part of the legislation correct. And I think that conversation is going to continue. So I do think that we have a little more work to do in this section, and I'm going to continue to do that work.
Okay.
Follow-up, Senator Gruenhagen?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for that response, Senator Murphy. I see both sides of this because, with Senator Liskey's testimony about rural hospitals, I know you're being stretched. I happen to know, have some close friends who are nurses. I mean, they're being called in the middle of the night to come in because they're short staff, okay? They already put their hours in and probably 10, 12 hours, and it is a 24/7 job, you know what I mean? And they're being called in the middle of the night to come back in because they're short staff. And so I know it's a stressful situation and that there's shortages right now. But to balance the other side out, and I guess I'd have Mary Krinky come forward if she would, just to balance both sides out. While she's coming up, I'll just add, see, the other problem I see is that in the rural hospitals especially, and probably even in Metro here, they're getting a larger and larger percentage of their patients on government reimbursement plans, Medicaid and Medicare, or Minnesota Care. Those reimbursement plans, they actually lose money on, so they have to offset that somehow. And whether it's stretching nurses for, additional care of the patients or something of that nature. Well, the result is that we see these, I think we have 20-some independent hospitals left in the whole state of Minnesota. The rest are all joined up with a conglomerate. And what happens is the further, we used to have Glencoe Regional Hospital, or Glencoe Hospital, or Hutchinson Hospital. Now everything's regional hospital and everything's getting interconnected, and you have somebody in an ivory tower who's disconnected from the local situation making these decisions. And the further away they get, the worse things seem to be. So, on the one hand, I have empathy for you, but on the other hand, the bill in its current form, according to the letters we have and the input I've had from, the hospitals, is that we're going to have empty beds and we're going to have further stress what's already a barely doable situation for the hospitals financially. And it wasn't even a big article, and I kept a copy of it in the Star Tribune a couple years ago, how many rural hospitals were hanging on just by a thread, okay? And to me, that's going to reduce access. And so that's the other concern I have. And yet I see your side of it, okay? I know people in the nursing and that they are being stretched and stressed. I just wish we could come to peace in the valley in this particular area. But Madam Chair, I do have a question for Mrs. Krinky.
Yeah, Senator Gruenhagen, why don't you go ahead and ask your question of Ms. Krinky, and then when you're done with that, I'll give Senator Murphy a chance to respond as well.
Yeah, we want a back and forth here.
Very
Helps
good.
us.
If you would go ahead. Would you go ahead with your question then?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think in your testimony and also on the gentleman's testimony, you firmly believe that this is going to create less access and actually empty beds in the hospital as far as patient access. Is that correct?
Ms. Krinky?
Madam Chair and members, if the committees pick a strict ratio, that number would then be enforced. And there is language in the bill that is most concerning that says nurses on a unit could vote to not accept another patient. So when language says that nurses can vote to not accept an additional patient, then the hospitals will not be able to admit more patients. They will back up in the emergency rooms, and we will have more boarding. If there is a strict ratio, the hospitals will likely then have to close units because they can't keep those units operating. And we believe that this will be a significant reduction in the amount of care capacity that we are able to provide to Minnesotans right now. And if I can, Madam Chair, there are 52,000 open healthcare positions right now in Minnesota. There are 5,000 open RN positions. All of our hospitals right now are trying to hire additional nurses. And Senator Gruenhagen, your example of calling in nurses in the middle of the night, that hospital was doing the exact right thing. So if there is a situation where patient acuity changes constantly, patients get sicker, and so the nurses who were on staff felt like they needed additional help. So my guess is the charge nurse says, we're going to call nurses and try to get them to come back in. They can refuse overtime. They're not forced to accept overtime, but that situation was actually the right thing to do. They were trying to call in more nurses. They didn't say, nope, we're not bringing in more nurses. They said, yep, let's try to bring in more nurses. So right now, we have 57% of our nurses who are choosing to work part-time. Because they want a more work-life balance. And so we're accommodating that, and it's a new change in our work environment, and hospitals are offering really good benefits with usually working about 24 hours a week. So it's tough out there, so thank you.
Ms. Cranky.
If Senator Murphy would like to respond.
I'll ask, Senator Murphy, would you like to respond now, or if you have, I don't know if Senator Gruenhagen has any more questions?
Well, I do have a couple more questions, but I'd like to hear her response to.
Well, I'm going to give Senator Murphy the option of responding either
Okay.
now, or would you like to wait and respond to this whole line of questioning together at the end of it?
I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Madam.
So go ahead, please, Senator Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, thanks for that response. And again, it's like a two-sided blade, okay? The other thing that gives me a little bit of hesitancy, and I know your heart's in the right place, Senator Murphy, okay, is that, I was chief negotiator for my school board for 6 years. And one of the things the Minnesota School Board Association drills into your head is don't negotiate away your supervisory rights, okay? And that was moving staff around in the school where needed. And unfortunately, we had done that, and it took a lot of, I won't say yelling and screaming, but there was a little cussing and swearing to finally get that straightened out, okay? So I see this, I just appreciate if you would work with the other side some too yet. I think this is a little bit out of balance, and I wish I had a silver bullet or a peace in the valley solution for you. It's not an easy one. And again, part of it is that the government reimbursement, especially for rural hospitals, is growing, and they're losing money on it, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or Minnesota Care. So it continues to put pressure on them to join big conglomerates or to stretch their services. And I just, with the demographic changes, that's a very difficult situation. So right now, I'm going to have to lean against it, but I surely hope that you work with stakeholders. And I just don't want to hurt my rural hospitals and patient access, but yet I want to identify with some of the concerns of the nurses, which well-meaning people have come to me with. So anyway, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gruenhagen. You don't have any questions for Ms. Cranky? Okay, thank you, Ms. Cranky. I'm Ms. Cranky. We spoke too soon. It sounds like Senator Dornick has perhaps a question. Go ahead, Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to, I heard a couple things that I appreciate was the 24 hours for the part-time. I know my daughter-in-law is a nurse and my sister-in-law is a nurse, and that has been a big benefit to them as they both have children to be able to work in nursing and still have that flexibility. So really appreciate that in the hospitals. That was one thing that was said. And then talk a little bit about some of the ranking of the state of Minnesota. How do we rank with other states on how the nursing, whatever they have, if you would answer that.
The question is for Ms. Cranky.
For Mr. Cranky, yes, please.
Madam Chair and members, the first part is easier, and I'll get to the second part as well. So right now in Minnesota, we do workforce analysis, and over half of the nurses in Minnesota now are choosing to work part-time. Hospitals are very generous in the competitive market, and most of our hospitals now are offering full benefits for the nurse and their family at 24 hours is the new normal, and that's usually either 3 8-hour shifts or 2 12-hour shifts. So we're good employers, and we're offering very generous benefits to to meet the needs of our nurses, and they want more of a work-life balance, and that's a good thing. We have seen national surveys from Wallet Hub and other national rankings where Minnesota always ranks near the top for culture and workplace environment. The last ranking that I saw had Minnesota as the 4th best workplace environment for nurses. So we believe that we are doing a good job of working on issues, and it's a good culture. I will say that one of the provisions in this bill that I do think is extremely important is the issue of violence and violence prevention in the workplace. I think if there is one thing that we could do to work together to retain more nurses at the bedside, it is to work collaboratively on the violence prevention. I do hear stories from not just nurses, but phlebotomists and other healthcare professionals that are getting hit and kicked. And so if I can say one thing that I think would help keep more nurses at the bedside and retention is to work on the violence prevention. And that's an issue that is of concern to all of us. And there is a section in this bill that we do support. So
Thank you. Senator Dornick, follow-up?
Yes, Madam Chair. So, Senator Murphy, you talked about a little change, and I actually sent you a proposed amendment, and I don't know if you had time to look at it or not, but I'd like to move the A10 amendment. If you want to pass it out, I can just explain it really quick.
Yes, we'll go ahead and have that handed out, Senator Dornick. Go ahead while we're making sure everyone has a copy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Murphy. So yeah, this is just kind of the concern that Ms. Krinke had about the language. So it was the fine. It's just right before the change that you made. So it's on page 10, line 10.29, and it must fine a hospital $250,000. So the amendment would go, instead of must, be may, and then up to 250. But I do have a question. So that's the amendment. So
Senator Dornick, is your question related to the amendment?
Yes.
Or is it separate?
Well, it's going to the 250,000. I'm just wondering where they come up with that number. That seems like a really high number. So
Okay. Thank you, Senator Dornick. Senator Murphy, and I apologize, it's been a little weird with our back and forth. I want to make sure that you have enough time, and your testifiers, if you have response to the line of discussion that Senator Gruenhagen was bringing forward. But if it's okay with you, we could go back to some of that. What I'd like to do is just address this amendment briefly. So to the A10 amendment, Senator, do you have a response to Senator Dornick's amendment in general, and then also the question about the number?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Dornick, and I appreciated that you sent the amendment ahead of time, that you shared with me that you have concerns about provisions in the bill, but this is something that you were interested in taking up this evening. So I was able to take a look at it in the context of the bill, and talk with nurses about the language, and with that, we would accept that amendment.
Very good. Senator Dornick, follow-up.
thank you, Senator Murphy and Ms. Chair. So I can move the amendment then?
Yes.
So moved.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Dornick moves the adoption of the A10 amendment onto Senate File 1561, which Senator Murphy has indicated she does not oppose. All in favor of adopting? Oh, no? Oh, just one moment, please, members. I'm sorry, Senator Pappas. I thought, Senator Pappas, you had something for me that was important and urgent. So back to Senator Dornick's motion of adopting the A10 amendment, which is being viewed in a friendly way by Senator Murphy. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The A10 amendment is adopted.
I just wanted you to watch me vote yes.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Senator Dornick, do you have any follow-up?
I do, but I don't know if you want to have Senator Murphy talk first, or otherwise, I have one question more, and then maybe a comment. So do you want me to do that now, or?
Why don't you go ahead with your one more question and comment, and then I'll give.
Well, thank you,
back to you.
Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Murphy, for taking that. I did ask about the 250, that number. That was one question. And then my other question would be, I didn't have a lot of time to read it, and I kind of sent you an email explaining that, and there's some of the current concerns, but I'm just not able to speak to some of those. But the one would be, the staffing committee, the hospital nursing workload committee, the hospital core staffing committee, and I'm just, I don't know what that all means because I'm not in that field, but it sounds like a lot of committees wondering about reports, and is that going to overburden some of the staff, and how is that going to work? So that's my two questions.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Dornick. And I want to go back to my earlier testimony to remind the committee that this legislation in this form is asking that practicing nurses, staff nurses, the ones that are taking care of the patients who, Senator Gruenhagen, you referred to people being in an ivory tower making decisions. The nurses who are practicing at the bedside taking care of patients are not in an ivory tower. Those nurses would join with nursing administrators, nurse managers in these committees to work through this question for each hospital. There would be, of those committees appointed, 35% of that committee would be those direct care nurses, so not a majority. They will not be in a majority position. But they want to be able to bring their professional judgment and voice to this discussion. And I think that's important. Like, it is a part of professional dignity. It is a part of the responsibility of a licensed provider to have a say, especially when the consequence, if something adverse happens as a result of short staffing, flows to the licensed nurse. They want to have a say. That's why these committees, instead of putting a ratio in law, are so powerful. And it is doing what we say we believe in, that people with different points of view but expertise come together to render a decision. And yes, it is the case that it will take time, but we also know that many hospitals already have these in place. And my expert, Ms. Mortrude, could talk about that a little bit more. It isn't that the committees are going to be meeting all the time, but we do want both the practicing nurses and the nurses who have responsibility for the management of that facility to wrestle with this and make some decisions so they have some professional autonomy and control in that decision-making. And while it is not as simple as a bill that we'd introduced before, I do think that this is a reasonable and an important way for us to say to our hospitals and the nurses who staff them, we want you to take care of this. We want you to get this right because we want our hospitals to be places where there are enough nurses to take care of our patients. And again, this legislation is about retaining our skilled nurses. I mean, part of that is about the ability to have confidence that you're going in to do a job that you not only love, but that you can do your best work. And when you leave, you feel like you've done right by your patients. It feels awful when you leave work and you know you haven't done right by your patients. That should be the exception and not the rule. And right now, nurses are telling us that that is not the exception, that they're leaving their shifts feeling like they have not done right by their patients. And that's not any good for any of us.
Ma'am, if you have any additional testimony to offer in regard to this discussion, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair and Senator, for the question regarding the committees and the work that they do. Right now, budgets are built for staffing and dealt with once a year. Staffing decisions may be made a lot more frequently because the activity in the hospital is so fast-paced. But that budget is decided on, and then staffing plans go out to all the units. And it's literally a ratio. It has the number of patients and the number of nurses. And when you match those two up, it's a ratio. 4 patients for this one nurse, 5 patients for this one nurse, 2 patients. It already exists. The problem is that when patient acuity and nursing intensity deem it necessary that we have more nurses, the nurses are told, nope, this is what the grid says. this is what the staffing plan says. You don't get any more. But the minute that we're overstaffed, nurses are sent home. Well, we have to follow this, right? And so when patients actually need it, the nurses are not listened to. So the committees are set up in this bill to have that discussion about how we create stability and security to know that when I come in, if our local committee decided that 5 was appropriate, I wouldn't come in and be assigned 8. Because there's this false security out there that 5% of me is good care, or at least it's better than no care, when actually I could actually do harm to a patient if I'm only giving 5% versus them not. We get concern for safe staffing forms submitted where nurses are floated to chemotherapy units and told you're going to give chemotherapy tonight when they've never been trained. If I did that without training, I could actually harm that patient more than if they missed that dose that night. This isn't about just a little bit of care is good. It's the right amount of care, the right time, amount of time that I have, and the right skill level. That's what we need to get to, because I'm the one that answers to the Board of Nursing, and I'm the one that looks at the patient's family and family members to tell them what just happened. I can't be responsible to do all that without any input into how this gets done. Like I said earlier, just last year, 90% of the time our nurses called for assistance and asked management to participate in solving the problem, the answers were, just do the best you can. Say a prayer that no one else comes in tonight, because we don't have anyone else. That's not a defense for me at the Board of Nursing. I don't get to say I prayed, but clearly not hard enough, right? Somebody has got to take this ownership with us, because we are the ones there defending that decision at that moment. And we can't be silenced.
Thank you. Follow-up, Senator Dornick.
Yes, Madam Chair. Well, I want to thank you for that. So that kind of goes over my head a little bit, because I know there's good people on both sides, so I try to keep up with you. I can feel your passion, so thank you for what you do. And I know you love your patients and care for them. There's something missing here. So the Section 2, is there some work that can be done on this, Senator Murphy, yet? Is there some work that you feel that can be done with some of the 2 testifiers maybe, or 1, or however you want to do that? Is there room to negotiate here yet, or do you feel like this bill is in the where you want it and there's no more room to move?
And from what I've understand, this bill has been negotiated for some time. But Senator Murphy, to Senator Dornick's question, if you have any additional response.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. We are a body that seeks to find the best outcomes through the work that we do. And I would never say there isn't room. When we finally debate this on the floor, it'll still be subject for amendments, and maybe we'll find one that is worthy. But I do know over my years, and I've worked with Mary Krinke for many, many years from the Hospital Association, and they are, as you've heard them testify tonight, Article 2 is not something that they support. They support provisions of this bill, but not the staffing provisions. And this bill without the staffing provisions will not keep nurses at the bedside. So I will continue to work with the nurses who are raising concerns, with members who are getting emails and concerns expressed by their communities, absolutely. But I also don't want to sit here and say we're going to reach peace in the valley, because we may get to the point, we may be at the point that we as policymakers have to make a choice about the proposal. So I'm going to keep working, Senator Dornick, and I hope that we find more progress and more common ground. But it is important that we take up this legislation and that we make it the law this year.
Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. So just going back to thank you for that. So I'm going to step away from that and let you guys work on that. The 250,000, that question never got answered. So where did that number come from? And it just seems, now I like it better that now that Dolly can choose, but that just seems like a really high, maybe after a few violations or whatever. But so speak to that, the amount.
Thank you. Senator Murphy or another guest, if you'd please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator. Katie Cottonbrook with the Minnesota Nurses Association. When we worked on drafting this piece, we worked with House Research, and that was a number they thought was reasonable, looking at other penalties that are enforced for retaliation. It was also a fee that felt that would prevent retaliation and cause some concern before managers continue to retaliate. And as you heard from our nurse, retaliation is very real. It's something that many of our nurses face at the job site for advocating for patient care. So we felt like this was a number in working with House Research that would try to prevent retaliation.
Thank you for that. No more questions, Madam Chair. I do want a 60-second closing when we're
Okay.
Other questions.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Dornick. Yes, Senator Verbatim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Murphy, for bringing forward the bill. I just wanted to say, as someone who, has sought care, and I'm sure will need care in the future, though I hope to be as healthy as I can be, when I see things, the provisions in this bill, like before hospital management lowers the staffing level of any unit, management must consult with and receive agreement from at least 50% of direct care registered nurses. That makes me feel like a lot more comfortable. And I think that the folks who are closest to this issue, or closest to the patients, should really be at the table making those decisions more than, management who's not there day to day taking care of patients. I really want those folks who know me, know my issues, to be advocating for me, and I trust nurses to do that. I also I think it's bad enough that there's been these really dangerous lack of staffing in our hospitals. And then when our nurses try to ring the alarm, they face retaliation. I mean, we heard it from our testifiers tonight. So I absolutely see the need for the bill. And again, I want the folks who are closest to the issues to be there making the decisions.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion? Yes, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Murphy, I'm glad you're trying again after many tries on this. I understand the concerns about shortage of nurses and short staffing and everything else. I keep thinking we are always told we got a shortage of nurses, and I think we have a lot more nurses than other states do, but when you have the ones who are choosing 24 hours, it's because they're getting burned out from too many double shifts and everything. And when you see this report on why we left the nursing profession, I think Senator Murphy said like 2,400 left in the last year. They're all leaving because of burnout. And they're saying the stress of this. And I think if you talk to, just ask nurses who work in a hospital, how many of them have gone to work and they work 12-hour shift and then we need you to stay on. And they packed a lunch or a breakfast or whatever meal, and they brought it with them in the car, and they eat it in the car on the way home because they never got their break. I mean, that to me is what's federal and state work standards require you to have meal breaks and bathroom breaks. And when I keep hearing nurses say they're not getting them, I mean, if it's happening on a regular basis, we've got a problem. And I talked to one nurse a couple of years ago who said she had worked same hospital, Minneapolis Hospital, and she had been there for I think she said 17 years, and she said she had more lunches in the last 9 months than she had in the previous 16 years. I said, what for? Oh, she moved into a surgical unit where federal law requires a certain staffing thing. So you got a long surgery, they have to replace you so you get your break. It's the only time they're required to let you have the break. So she said she had more breaks in 9 months than she had in 16 years. means she's getting 1 or 2 meal breaks a month if she's lucky. I mean, that's a standard that, I mean, I understand the hospitals having struggled to do this, but this doesn't mandate the ratio. It says we got to work something out. And I think this is I think we've gone way beyond where we ought to be in terms of the safety of the staffing. And I just think that this is a reasonable way where you have a committee to work it out. And yeah, it shouldn't ever have to go to arbitration because they should work it out. But if they're not, then it seems to me you have to do it. And Senator Dornick, I agree, the 250,000 struck me as a lot. But when you're punishing somebody, when you're retaliating against them for making a report on safe staffing, it seems to me you really want to stop that behavior. That's about the worst thing you can do. You're losing the protection of the safety that somebody who sees the safety issue, we don't want you to do it, so we're going to punish you for doing it. So to me, that's one of the worst things you could do. I think the amendment that you made was reasonable. I don't think we need to mandate that, but I think you have to have a penalty that's significant enough that they can impose it. So Senator Murphy, I'll move the bill when you're ready for it moved, but I just think this is something that when I started hearing from more and more nurses who they eat their meal that they pack for work in the car on the way home after 12 or more hours, I mean, that's a problem. And I think somebody ought to be suing on the Fair Labor Standards thing because they are required to give people breaks.
Thank you, Senator Marty. I'll just echo some of these sentiments, Senator Murphy. Thank you very much for your leadership on this bill, and thank you to the testifiers and all of the advocates who've been working on this bill for a long time. I've heard testimony the last couple of years, especially during the pandemic, but coming from a family with a mom as a nurse, I've known that this has been an issue for a long time, the staffing in particular. So I'm just very appreciative, and I'm very, very glad to support this bill and also share the sentiment that Senator Umu-Verbeten said, that if there's anybody that I trust to be making these very important decisions about how many nurses do we need to provide adequate care, and what does that look like in the hospital, that's eminently reasonable. And I applaud all of you for having the flexibility to try and find that peace in the valley that we all look for. But I urge you to stand strong, because I think that sometimes we're just not going to find agreement on certain points. And you know that your patients are depending on you. I just thank you for advocating for them and for each other. I want to go ahead and let Senator Dornick have a last word from his perspective, and then Senator Murphy, if you wanted to offer some closing remarks, and then we'll go with Senator Marty's motion and move the bill. Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Murphy, and I want to thank all the testifiers, both sides of the nurses. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your work. We all appreciate what you do. The Section 3 is horrific that we even have to address that, so thank you for Section 3. Section 2, this has been worked on for quite a few years. I'm hearing. I just saw it like yesterday, and so I read it kind of quickly last night and went through it, and that's why I emailed you, Senator Murphy, to try to get some more. And I'm very careful to try to learn what it is before I vote for something. So I can't support it right now. I need to talk to my district and talk to some of the hospitals that are there, but that's where I'm at. So I just wanted to make sure the thank yous are there and the appreciative of all the work that's done. It has been done for years, and I'm going to check with the district and see what some of those hospitals and keep learning more about the bill. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Murphy, would you like to offer us some closing words before we move the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I was here at the start of the committee hearing this evening when Senator Boldon was presenting her bill. One of your testifiers said, and I'm going to quote her, "I'm going to advocate like a mother." It was profound, and I feel like that. I'm advocating like a nurse, because I am, and I'm advocating like a mom, and I'm advocating as a policymaker who cares deeply about the people of Minnesota and believe that this piece of legislation is going to improve their health care. And with that, I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. And a question for you before we move the bill. Where is it your intention to have the bill proceed next? To which committee?
So, Madam Chair, it would be great if it could just go to the governor's desk. All right. But I don't get all the wishes. So
It's your birthday.
It is. That's right. It is my birthday. I think that while this was not my favorite path, I think that it is right that you send us to judiciary as we are discussing with DLI. They have some concern about the interaction between the work that will be generated for them, a fiscal note, and a private right of action. And if we're going to take up the question of a private right of action, it should go to that committee for that purpose. And so that's what I would ask you to do.
Very good. We will do that, Senator Murphy. So Senator Marty moves that Senate File 1561 as amended be recommended to pass and re-referred to the Judiciary Committee. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The motion passes. Thank you very much, Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Next on our docket, we have Senate File 58. This is the last item on our agenda this evening. Senator Murphy is here to present Senate File 58. And Senator Murphy, I believe you have an A2 author's amendment. Would someone please move the A2? Senator Marty moves the adoption of the A2 author's amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The A2 amendment is adopted. Senator Murphy, to your bill as amended.
Madam Chair and members, thank you very much for giving time to this piece of legislation, Senate File 58, which is the Warehouse Worker Safety Bill. We have already been before this committee. We were before you probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. We have subsequently been to the Judiciary Committee, but we've been doing some work in the interim, and we thought it was right to come back to this committee so you could adopt the amendment that you just adopted within the jurisdiction of this committee. There's actually one more technical amendment that that Council suggested that I think we should also take up, and then I can just talk briefly about the bill.
Very good. What is the technical amendment, Senator Murphy? Do we have it? The A3? Okay. We have the A3 amendment, and I believe that amendment is being passed out right now. I'll wait till everybody gets it.
Thank you.
Okay, members, hope you've had a chance to take a quick glance at the A3 amendment. Would someone please move the A3 amendment? Thank you. Senator Kupek moves the adoption of the A3 amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The A3 amendment is adopted. Senator Murphy, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I will not go through a full bill presentation because you've already heard this legislation, but I want to recall that this is a common sense requirement for workers in warehouses, that companies notify warehouse workers of any quotas they're expected to meet and provide their workers with access to their data and how they're performing those quotas. It does just a few things. It simply requires warehouse companies to notify their workers of any quotas that they'll be disciplined or fired for if they fail to meet them. And it allows workers to request access to their performance data. It protects workers' existing legal rights by ensuring that any quota or performance standard won't interfere with that workers' legal rights to take a break from meals, to use the restroom, and to pray. It gives the Department of Labor and Industry the ability to enforce the provisions and to open up an investigation. This legislation will ensure workers have the information they need to keep themselves safe and to keep their coworkers safe. Since we were here last, we have spent a fair amount of time talking with the retailers. They had a number of suggestions for us, and some of those suggestions are incorporated in the amendment that you've just adopted. We also had the opportunity to visit the Amazon warehouse in Shakopee, which was amazing, interesting, and informative. And what we saw, of course, was automation, like you would expect when you think about the way that Amazon does its work. But you can also see that the repetitive work that those people are doing in order to meet those quotas can be, in many cases, taxing for them and can put them at odds and at risk in terms of their health or keeping their jobs. And that's why this legislation is so important. That's why we're here tonight. And I wanted to make sure that we were in the committee of jurisdiction to take up these amendments so that we get the bill into the shape that we want it in as it goes forward through the rest of the legislature. And with me is Kyle Makarios. He's been my partner in this work, and he's here to answer questions or to add anything else.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Murphy. Mr. Makarios, do you have any testimony that you'd like to offer the committee this evening, or are you just going to be available for any questions?
Just here for questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, very good. And we also had signed up to testify Bruce Newstead. Welcome to the Senate Labor Committee.
Thank you, Chairman McEwen.
And if you just introduce yourself and any affiliation you'd like us to note for the record, we look forward to any testimony that you have.
Sounds great. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Bruce Newstead. I'm with the Minnesota Retailers Association. We're a trade group of retailers. About a third of our members are kind of national, well-known brands. About a third of our members are regional retailers, usually a few stores, maybe even some in a couple other states around Minnesota. And about a third of our members are small, family-owned Main Street retailers. One of the great things, the commonalities among all those, is they all use warehousing somewhere in the supply chain. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I want to wish Senator Murphy a happy birthday, and want to thank her also. As Senator Murphy mentioned, we've spent a great amount of time talking about this bill. I think probably 2.5 hours since its introduction, and I'm actually very, very appreciative of that. In the same token, I do have a few concerns with the bill. I know the committee heard the bill in its fullness already once, so I don't want to dive into one of those things. But Madam Chair, I want to do something weird that I've never done in my career before, and that is I want to talk about another state, and the state of California. So let it be on record that Bruce Newstead is up here talking about wishing a bill was more like the state of California bill. Because of that, 2 jurisdictions have passed this bill, California and New York, and there's some lessons learned in the passing of those bills. And so I think there is some benefit to looking toward California, and Senator Murphy was very gracious. We probably presented her with 30 or 40 suggested changes to the bill, some technical in nature, but all surrounding sort of the definitions that are used. So not really designed to dispute the merits of the bill or the intentions of the bill, but rather trying to kind of firm up language with another states that's been through this exercise before. So we think that's really, really important. And if, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, I'll just highlight just a couple of those areas tonight. As I mentioned, California and New York have done a pretty good job on definitions. And in a bill like this, that's where really the devil is in the details when it comes to what workers expect, what a warehouse might expect, and what a regulator might expect. So we'd love to have Senator Murphy continue to think about what some of those definitions look like in California and New York. And just to point out a couple of them, I know the Senator had an amendment adopted tonight relating to drivers, but we think there's some probably more clear language relative to exempting drivers that drive to and from a warehouse, as an example, when you look at lines 1.10. There's some language in the Minnesota bill here, 1.12, that relates to group of employees. There's another example of an area where we'd probably do well and good to define what that means. Is that a group of employees under one single employer, or is that a group of employees that might work for multiple employees in a warehouse? Today's modern warehouses are really interesting organizations. You can have a warehouse where there's some assembly done, some packaging, some warehousing, and some distribution, and those might be done by different companies. So terms like that would be well and good to be thinking about what does that really mean in our Minnesota statute. Definition of quota in 2.14, we think it'd be really well and good to be more consistent with California relative to that definition. And then there are some things such as just the timelines, and in the particular in this bill, on line 3.11, there's the time for a warehouse manager to respond for a request for data. Believe it or not, in California and New York, that's 14 days and 21 days. In Senator Murphy's bill, well-intentioned, that's 72 hours. And while there may be some warehouses that could provide that data in 72 hours, we have to also think about those warehouses that might be more challenged from less technology relative to providing that data and timeline. A couple other things, Madam Chair, I don't want to dive too deep into it, but on the enforcement section that Senator Murphy mentioned, Minnesota is a 1.3 or a 30% higher from the average, whereas those other states are 1.5. So again, an area where we think, believe it or not, California probably got it right or closer to right than what we have here in Minnesota. And I'll end just with a few other comments. I know this isn't the Judiciary Committee, but because there are all these definitions and they can have different terms and different meanings behind the terms, we really love the idea of an agency enforcement versus a private right of action. Gives an agency an opportunity to really, again, establish for not only workers, but those employers what those definitions mean and work with those employers. So with that, I'll flag finally just, I think there's an absence of an implementation timeline in this, and I think it'd be great if Senator Murphy thought a little bit more about what that might be. We'd hate to have that be a July 1st or an August 1st relative to some of those less sophisticated warehouses that might be impacted by this bill, and just kind of think through that. So thanks for indulging all those comments, Madam Chair, and happy to stand around for questions or comments.
Thank you for your testimony. Any last or any additional comments before we move to discussion, Senator Murphy?
I'm thinking a lot about Tupac and California Love right now, but that would be a conversation not in the committee.
Very good. All right, members' discussion. Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And happy birthday, Senator Murphy. And Bruce, I prefer if you stay if you could, if that's all right with you, Madam Chair.
Yes, after you.
Okay. So I just want to go back in time a little bit. So when we were here last time, and this is what I like. I like you three, and I asked if I could be involved in the negotiation with this bill. And so I'm still asking for that because I really haven't been involved. And that's how we get things done, get peace in the valley. And I agree. We're not always going to have peace in the valley, but we got to try. And I would like to do that with the four of us, because I think we're with your permission, of course. But anyways, that's kind of what you had said to me. And then when we toured the facility, what an amazing facility it was. And so I learned a lot. It was like a 2-hour, something like that. And so then after the tour, you walked over to me and you said, I really want to work with you on this bill. So I'm taking at your word. So I'm hoping that we will do that soon. Some of the things that I have questions about to Mr. Makarios is the quotas. I'm a little bit confused on that because and the access to that. So when we got towards the end of the tour, there's that kiosk where they as the worker could punch in their name and they could see their whatever the information that was there. So I guess my first question is to that specific part of the tour.
Yes, Senator Murphy or Mr. Makarios.
Madam Chair, Kyle Makarios, I'm here representing both the Teamsters Union and the Awood Center. Thank you for the question, Senator Dornick. I am not familiar I have never been in the Amazon facility, don't know what the kiosk looks like, and don't know how it works. What I do know is that this bill says that an employee has the right to request their work speed data and that the company has 72 hours to provide it to them. And so if it can happen within 72 hours and their work speed data is transmitted to them, then I assume that they would be largely in compliance, at least with that provision of this bill.
Follow up, Madam.
Senator Dornick.
Thank you for that. So there's other warehouses, so I'm sure not all warehouses has that to the point, but so again, that was brought up by the testifier that it was 21 days in California and 14 days in New York. So I think there's some room that we could work on that area. I'm sure that that facility could do that, but there's others that can't. So that's the first warehouse, lately that I've been in. So So I would like to see if we can address that. And there was other things that the testifier said too about some other changes. So to the next point would be some of the issues with the California. It was my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that I got the California bill here, so, and that this bill is more like the beginnings of the California bill, and then I'm not sure if that's true or not. So so my question is, where did this bill come from in this stage, or I mean that we have here, versus what the California bill is in the form, or I mean the past? Because through this session, there's many bills that I'm getting from, that came from California or New York. So if that makes sense. So I'm just wondering, again, does that make sense, the question? Or otherwise I can repeat it.
Senator Murphy?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Dornick and members. This legislation has come out of the experiences of warehouse workers. When we were first before you, we had warehouse workers from the Amazon facility. We also had a warehouse worker who, and I can't remember the facility from which that person came, but a Teamster, a different facility, a different model. This is the result of, I would say, 3 years worth of work. The workers raising their concerns and their voices, and the coming together, expressing that, and I believe getting connected with, creating the Awood Center, getting connected with Kyle, getting connected with the author of the bill in the House, who was the person who first took this on and said, we need to find a path forward here in the state of Minnesota, because people should be able to go to work, do their jobs, do them safely, and not fear for the loss of their job or experience serious injury. So this is the result of a number of years of work. I am the author of the legislation this year. It was introduced in the Senate last year, but I wasn't the author. It was heard in the House last session, and those workers at the warehouses have continued to work, to push, to refine, and to talk about why this legislation is so important. So it is the case that 2 other states have preceded us. And I've had a nice conversation with Mr. Newstead over a number of hours, it's been really fruitful. But it is a product of the experiences of workers here in Minnesota, which is what I think we should do. It's always right to look at what other states are doing, what are their experiences, what can we learn from those experiences, but we should make our policy based on the experiences of the people who are working here in the state of Minnesota, and that's what this represents.
Follow-up, Senator Dornick?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So, again, it's hard to speak to all warehouses since I've only been at one, so I'm going to speak to the Amazon one again. And then this last question, and then I'm hoping that we can get together soon and to have the conversation face-to-face instead of like this. So, so the loss of jobs, they get fired for the quotas. Do we have, as my understanding as, again, by that kiosk that that was like 3%. Do you remember that? Were you, I think it was, they look at their production and kind of what they're doing. And if it's down to like 3%, then they try to train them more, or they say, hey, maybe we could move you to a different place. That was what I heard. Not that they were going to get fired. And as I talked to some of the, there was quite a few that were on the tour with us, and we had lots of conversation. I talked to almost all of them. And as that time, what I was told of the number one reason that somebody is fired or let go is because they don't show up for work for 1 or 2 days, and they try to call them and try to see, and then after they can't get a hold of them, then they stop their badge. So that's what I heard. So my question is, I'm not sure if Kyle can address this either, but are they getting fired for quotas, not meeting quotas, or do we have any data on that?
Senator Murphy or Mr. Makarios?
Thank you, Senator McEwen and Senator Dornick. I don't have any data on that, and I don't know. I mean, all this bill says that if someone gets disciplined or fired because they're not making rate, right, because they're not hitting their production quota, that they're given copies of that data to show that.
And Madam Chair, we did have testifiers here before this committee talking about the fear of loss of job when they're not meeting their quotas. I found the Amazon facility is really significant. It's big. It is big. I think there were 4 kiosks in that very, very large facility. The person who came and badged in and showed us how it worked talked a lot about the way that he works to make sure he is able to meet the quota, including pushing himself at the start of the shift to do as much as he can and work as quickly as he can so that he banks up enough of his time so that later in the shift, if he's tired, that he's got enough banked up to meet the quotas throughout the whole shift. They have essentially what is like a gaming system, so they're testing each other and competing with each other over how quickly they can work. He said that you can make up your time when you're moving smaller packages, so you should work more quickly there than when you have to work and move larger packages, because that might slow you down. This was a person who, he spent about 10 minutes with us, but he conveyed, and he likes his work, but he did clearly convey the pressure that he faces every day, and he's taking it as a competitive thing. But when we had people come and testify, and they talked about language barriers, they talked about expectations, they talked about not always knowing the numbers that they need to meet, I do think that it is creating a situation that is high test. There's a high expectation there that the workers can't necessarily meet. And we want to make sure that they can do their jobs, they can keep their jobs, they can do them safely, not get hurt.
Something brief, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to take another moment to point out this is an area where our bill is different from California and at a higher level. In California, you would need to have your rights violated to request your data. In the Minnesota bill, you're open to request your data. So just not to get too far off a topic, but just want to flag it's another example of an area where there's some differences between the bills.
Thank you. Follow-up, Senator Dornick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to quit. I'm just going to, will you commit to myself to have us 4 in a room talking about this in the very near future? Senator Murphy.
Senator Murphy.
Madam Chair and Senator Dornick, I would be happy to do that. And I hope that when you come, you bring, just like you did earlier on the other bill, your ideas, your language. That would be great.
All right. So I'll look forward to that very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dornick. Senator Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just encourage you to work with Senator Dornick and get in a room with all 4 of you, because he's got a lot of experience in this particular area. But one of the sections of the bill that I just got a question about is on page 4, 4.5 to 4.10. And here we're creating a former or current employee, they can bring civil action for damages and injunctive relief. Well, and that's fine, I guess, but the thing is, they can get recovery of cost, reasonable attorney fees, and, so forth as far as being reimbursed. But there are a certain percentage, it's a small percentage, of people who game the system, okay? And I can give you a couple examples where employers just paid the money out, even though they knew that the person bringing the action was wrong. They just wanted them to go away, and when they weighed paying a certain amount out versus the cost of going to court and everything else, they just thought, here's $10,000 or $15,000, go down the road and go someplace else. So I guess I'd like to see in there that if a civil action is taken by an employee, if it's found to be fraudulent or false, that there would be some recovery costs by the employer for that action. There is for the employee, but I just think we need to balance that out, and I think that balance would pretty much eliminate, fraudulent or frivolous claims. And-
Senator Gruenhagen, I just want to make a note that this bill has been to the Judiciary Committee.
Okay.
And that clearly, that piece is within the purview and the jurisdiction of that committee, and I think was probably fleshed out by those members if that was something that they're concerned about. I hear your concern and your issue that you're raising, and I'll let Senator Murphy speak to it if she has any response. Is that what you would prefer?
Sure. Let me
Okay.
just make a quick comment. I realize it's a judiciary thing, but if you are going to do some negotiation on that bill, I'd like to see a little bit of balance in that particular area, if Senator Murphy wants to respond.
Senator Murphy, do you care to make any comment on that issue?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'll just say that we were before the Judiciary Committee, and they did go through this and debate it. And I appreciate Senator Gruenhagen's concern that there might be someone that games the system, but I don't want to strip people's rights because of a concern of someone who might do that. We want to make sure we're protecting the workers, and I think this provision does that.
Thank you. Members, Senator Umer Verbaeten? You good? Okay. Senator Marty? Yeah. Go ahead, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When this bill was here last time, when we had the testimony, didn't we have one or two of the workers say they would be locked out of the building next time they came back to work because they didn't meet their quota, and they didn't know what happened, they just weren't working there anymore? Because that to me is one of the things that gets me. I'm glad you've got the bill, and it looks like you've made progress, and I have one thing that it's technical.
It is.
But section 2 on page 4 is a severability clause, which we don't need because it's already severable. Do you mind if I strike that?
Madam Chair, Senator Marty, can you say one more time why we should do that?
Senator
Sure,
Marty.
because chapter 645 point something or another says every statute is severable unless we specifically spell out in the bill that it's not severable. So it's totally redundant language, and I've been trying to encourage drafters to do it. So, Madam Chair, I'll move to delete section 2 on page 4.
Senator Murphy, to Senator Marty's oral amendment.
Senator Marty and Madam Chair, I appreciate the beauty of legislating and accept this as a friendly amendment.
Thank you. Members, Senator Marty has moved that section 2, lines 4.13 through 4.16 be deleted from Senate File 58. Did I see that adequately? All in favor of the adoption of that oral amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That is adopted.
Anyhow, Madam Chair, it's a good bill with or
Very
without
good.
that.
Thank you, Senator Murphy.
I'll move if you need.
Okay, thank you, Senator Marty. Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very briefly, just one quick question here. I actually got to tour a different warehouse in my district that was brand new. Home Depot just opened up in the very south edges of Rosemount, which is part of my district. And I was very excited to see that they have addressed some of these issues. They actually have a huge wall that basically tells them what their quota is, and it has this big thing, this big display of what their goal is. And I was actually talking to the warehouse manager and talking about this bill because I was concerned. I was like, well, this is going to be a new thing for them to deal with here, as I don't think they've probably experienced this here in Minnesota. So I asked, I said, so do you guys have personal quotas? Is this board just the standard quota for the whole warehouse? Where are we at on that? And he was kind enough to tell me that that's how they deal with their quota. It's a team effort. There's no individual quotas. They have to meet the quota for the day. That's their goal. So my question is pretty straightforward, and I think I will get a pretty easy answer, is does that suffice? Does that fall under the rules of this bill? Will they meet this so that they don't have to worry about the reporting to individuals about what their quotas are? Because it's a team effort, it's not an individual assigned quota, are they falling within this rule?
Senator Murphy.
I'm studying just a moment, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Senator Lusky, that's a great question, tough question, which I appreciate. I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to do my best here off the cuff. Work speed data in this bill is defined to include data that an employer collects that could be a group of employees, around a group of employees' pace of work. And so, and I suppose Mr. Newstead will probably correct me if I'm wrong as well. Which I would also appreciate. But so this group's work speed data does include group work speed data. So an employer is required to tell their workforce what that is. If it's something they can be disciplined or fired for, they have to tell them that, right? And then if an employee's work speed data is requested from the employer, they have to share that with them. So I believe that yes is the short, I mean, assuming this particular warehouse is over 250 employees and otherwise meets the criteria, I believe that the answer is yes, this would apply to them.
Any follow-up, Senator Liskey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, of course, now that we've got a yes, now it directs another question. So in the bill, I know it talks about being in a specific language and being provided to, so this is a big sign on the wall. They don't have printed copies that they hand out to every employee at the warehouse. They don't have it in every single language that we've talked about. We've had this discussion previously while it was here before. My concern there is they're trying everything they can to provide a group effort. And in theory, it's well translated across the team that they know what they need to do. So now that, is that display enough for them to fall within these guidelines, or are now they going to be facing an issue where if they don't provide the written quota, they are now on the hook with whatever penalties they may face?
Ms. Precarious.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Lusky. Yes, this bill requires each employer to provide each employee a written description of each quota, to which the employee is subject and how it is measured. That's what this bill that's, I think, what my answer to that question would be.
And, sir, did you have something that you'd like to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
As well?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. I think part of your question, Senator Liskey, relates to what is a quota as well. So I was at that same tour that you referenced, and I would argue kind of their group goals there actually weren't quotas, but rather targets. And that's where, again, kind of the definitions within the bills become very important relative to, what not so much even what's a group of employees, because I think that's fairly well defined, 1.12 years as a group of employees, but what technically is a quota, and have we adequately defined that term?
Thank you, Senator Liskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, that's, I think, something that Senator Dornick would really like to work on, again, is the devil's in the details. So making sure that we identify what is a quota, what's a target, those things. I think they are pretty well defined, but I just want to make sure we are ready to go when this moves forward. Thank you.
Okay. Members, seeing no further discussion, Senator Murphy, any last comments before we go ahead and move forward?
I am glad that it is still my birthday. I think it is unfortunate that, you celebrate your birthday while you're at work, and in a public place, sometimes it makes people feel like they have to celebrate with you. But I'm grateful for the kindness of the committee, and I will, probably have a little glass of wine when we're done. And with that, I hope you'll support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. And Senator Marty is, and very quickly, Senator Murphy, we have this going to finance. Is that your understanding? Senator Murphy, or Senator Marty moves that Senate File 58 as amended is recommended to pass and is re-referred to the Finance Committee. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion passes. Happy birthday, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The Senate Labor Committee is adjourned.
Yeah, so we'll get some amendments for you if that's what you want.